all of you on this weekly huddle. My name is Anup Agrawal. All the attendees here, they have attended the session before, so I don't need to introduce myself. I'm joined by my colleague and co-host for the session, Praneeth. Okay, perfect. I'm joined by my colleague and co-host for the huddle, Dr. Praneeth, whom you all know as well. The huddle is an audience level interactive session where we discuss a variety of things, mostly focused around healthcare, as we are all part of that group. We typically pick up a topic or a clinical case like today's and restrict our discussion around that. The basic premise of the huddle is to bring our casual hallway discussions to a more organized platform like this one and share our ideas. So a lot of times we discussed in the OPD rooms, in the hallways. I'm sure a lot of us go to Jhansi Madam's lab and just ask her about her opinion. We're just trying to get it a little bit more formalized. While we do want to talk about science, the huddle aims to bring out your practice patterns and understand the rationale of what makes you take a particular decision. And it doesn't necessarily have to be guideline based till the time we understand taking local factors into consideration in terms of why we are making this session. This weekly huddle is hosted every week on Wednesdays at 7:30 p.m. like the one today. And this is our 23rd session. The topic for today's discussion is antibiotic therapy for infective endocarditis. So I will give you a few clinical cases. Typically, I have one clinical case and we discuss for an hour around that, because I understand that for antibiotic therapy, we really can't be discussing about one particular case for 1 hour. I have got 5 different cases. We will try to see how much we can get through. And again, the idea here won't be to make the diagnosis of infective endocarditis or look for indications of surgery or whatnot. We are precisely going to talk about antibiotic therapy for infective endocarditis. The huddle is not a speaker and audience model, rather an audience level interaction, which means that any of the attendees can raise their hand or unmute themselves to give their input. As a courtesy, you should wait for others to finish their thoughts before you unmute yourself. So I think that would be a general courtesy. So I always start the session with my clinical question, and in this case, I have a few of them. So I'll start with the first one. We'll just get people opinion, and then we will go to the next one. As a courtesy, may I request all the participants that when you speak, if you could restrict yourself to maybe 1 to 1.5 minutes so that we can get your thought and at the same time move on to other people's thought and also move on to next case. So this is my case number 1. This is a 58-year-old male with fever, shortness of breath, and PNT. He has a previous history of mitral valve prolapse with severe MR, and he's on medical management. On arrival to the emergency for fever and shortness of breath, his blood pressure is 100/50. He's tachycardic with a heart rate of 110. He's saturating 88 to room air and 98 on 4 liters. On examination, he's fluid overloaded, classic overload state. Bedside echocardiogram shows ejection fraction of 70%, MVP, severe MR, that we all know, but there is also a small, less than 1 millimeter square vegetation sitting on the mitral leaflet. There are no other issues. Labs are okay except leukocytosis, and ESR is 110. So you decide to admit the patient, manage to the lines of heart failure with the working diagnosis of infective endocarditis, heart failure, mitral valve prolapse, and severe mitral regurgitation. You get the blood cultures of this patient, and then you want to start him on empiric therapy. So this is a classic, typical clinical diagnosis of infective endocarditis. I'm sure with all the features that I told you, this is diagnosis of infective endocarditis can be easily made. And this guy would classify as a complicated infective endocarditis because he has got clear signs of fluid overload. So you want to give this patient empiric antibiotic at Care Banjara. And my question here is, what will be your antibiotic choice? So Praneeth, I'll start with you and then I'll invite other people's thought. Praneeth.
Yeah, ceftriaxone, ceftriaxone 1 gram IVBD.
So you would put him on monotherapy?
Yeah.
You have fever and then you have got vegetation.
Yeah.
So you will wait for the cultures to escalate. Is that what I'm reading it correct?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So I'm just going to ask other people who have joined. Guru sir, how would you, what kind of antibiotic would you put this patient on, and what would be your thought process to it?
Thank you, Anup. I would slightly differ with Praneeth's kind of thought process because it's a native valve endocarditis and he is a little unstable in terms of having a congestive cardiac failure. My initial antibiotic therapy would include vancomycin along with ceftriaxone. It's a left-sided endocarditis. For a native valve endocarditis, I think my initial therapy would be a combination of vancomycin with with the ceftriaxone because I would like to cover most of the organisms which are known to cause infected endocarditis. So, namely being Streptococcus, Enterococcus, as well as Staphylococcus. So, I think just ceftriaxone monotherapy might not be, kind of advisable. Generally, they combine the ceftriaxone with gentamicin. But seeing the unstable hemodynamics, blood pressure is 100/70, and he's in CCF. Nephrotoxicity of gentamicin is definitely a concern for me. So vancomycin, though it is also nephrotoxic, but it is less as compared to gentamicin. So I would use a combination of vancomycin with ceftriaxone.
So, Guru sir, before you skip this question further, so traditionally, and one of the reasons why we are discussing is because there is very positive data on infective endocarditis. In fact, lots of the data are very early on with 20 years old antibiogram. We really don't have very good updated data set. But even if we go by what the guidelines would suggest, everywhere MP-Genta is what we keep reading and remembering. So your two antibiotic choices are not the two which the textbook says. Can you just walk us through why not MP-Genta, why bank ceftriaxone?
See, when you're talking about ampicillin and gentamicin, you are basically, kind of, if you see the drug chart or the chart given in Harrison, actually he talks about either streptococci, enterococci, staphylococci, Hasek organisms, Coxella bonneti, and etc. I don't remember table offhand. But when you're using just ampicillin, you are not, you are probably just trying to cover enterococcus. That's all. You're covering only enterococcus. You understood? So the treatment which you're telling me, Ampli plus Genta, is what is recommended only for enterococcus. When you're talking about Streptococcus viridans or the Streptococcus group as such, the guidelines say in when you talk about Streptococcus, it is about the MIC values. If the effective MIC is a certain value, you just use penicillin G or just ceftriaxone or just vancomycin. You use penicillin plus gentamicin, or use penicillin plus penicillin for 4 weeks and gentamicin for 2 weeks, or vancomycin for only 4 weeks if you're talking about Streptococcus. Okay, but when you're talking about Enterococcus, again you have regimes like ampicillin with ceftriaxone or ampicillin with gentamicin, as you said, or vancomycin plus gentamicin. Again, you have Staphylococcus, which comes next, where whether you have MSSA with on native valves or MRSA on native valves. Right? We're talking about native valve right now. We're not talking about prosthetic valve.
Yes.
So all this, if you see the common drugs in all these three organisms, because we're talking about empirical therapy, the common two drugs are ceftriaxone and vancomycin. You understood? So
Okay.
when we are using ampicillin, you are not covering your MSSA, you're not covering your your Streptococcus adequately, right?
Okay.
That is why this combination of these two drugs, and now the mainstay, if any of us go back and read infected endocarditis from Harrison's, he's very clear about when we're talking about native valve endocarditis, where the patient is hemodynamically stable. They say wait for blood cultures, don't give antibiotics, take 3 sets of blood cultures and wait. Because the patient is not very sick, you can just wait for the antibiogram to come to you. If the patient is hemodynamically unstable, as you just told, this patient is congestive cardiac failure, the treatment of choice for native valve endocarditis is a combination of vancomycin and ceftriaxone.
Perfect. Thank you so much, sir. Let us talk. Let us get more opinion. Pawan, sir, I'm unmuting you. Pawan Reddy, he is our critical care head at Care Banjara. Sir, this patient comes to you. Your antibiotic of choice for this patient.
Yeah, the same way. What Anup, this is, I would believe, vancomycin and ceftriaxone. Basically, we have to understand few things. One is Staphylococcus and Streptococcus, when we say Staphylococcus epidermidis, that is the cons we say, which is more commonly we see coagulase negative staph. Most of it is methicillin resistant, which is penicillin resistant. You have to go for vancomycin or teicoplanin and the other drugs or linezolid. So MR cons is one that is usually seen. And the other thing, Enterococcus, there are two types. One is fecalis, one is faecium. Fecalis is usually sensitive to benzyl penicillin, but faecium is inherently resistant to penicillins. So there again, your choice of drug would be either vancomycin, linezolid, or targocid, what we say, teicoplanin. So I think vancomycin and ceftriaxone, or the other choice would be vancomycin plus gentamicin. But then both of them nephrotoxic drugs. So best ideal would be vancomycin plus ceftriaxone.
Perfect. Thank you so much, sir. Jhansi, madam, I'll take your opinion. I'm unmuting you. We heard from these two guys.
I'm asking you where it leads to.
Okay, there is some cross noise. Jhansi, madam, I'm going to unmute you. There is some noise at your end. Jhansi, ma'am, I hope you are able to hear me.
Now?
Yes, we are able to hear you. So, ma'am, we heard from Dr. Guru and Dr. Pavan. Is there a role of ampicillin in the current empiric antibiotic regimen, or you see most of the bugs being ampicillin resistant?
Most of them are ampicillin resistant, but if in community acquired infective endocarditis, you are treating on a provisional diagnosis. That is, clinically you are detecting endocarditis. Before starting the cultures and antibiotic sensitivity, you can start.
Okay, and there, so
afterwards, if you get the 3-4 days afterwards, if you are seeing the antibiotic sensitivity, based on the sensitivity, you can change.
So are there still community acquired bugs which are ampicillin sensitive right now?
Yes, sure. Yes.
Okay.
We are seeing mostly community acquired only, we are seeing ampicillin sensitivity.
Okay, perfect. We'll get back to you again, ma'am, for further discussion. Dr. Vikas, I'm unmuting you. I just need to get your opinion on a slightly different case scenario. This patient that I shared is sick. Do you differentiate antibiotic choice in patients who are sick versus patients who are not sick on presentation? Does your antibiotic choice differ, or you pretty much put the same empiric antibiotic? Dr. Vikas Reddy.
Hello, sir.
Yeah. Please go ahead, Dr. Vikas.
Antibiotic with a combination of ceftriaxone. Yes, sir. Am I audible, sir?
Yes, you are very much audible.
Hello.
You are very much audible.
Sure, sir. My first choice of antibiotic would be a combination of ceftriaxone plus gentamicin for 4 weeks, sir. Or in those who are typically sick, I prefer the monotherapy with vancomycin for 4 weeks.
Okay. All. Dr. Guru, I'm just going to come back to you again, and I have got very specific questions for these kind of scenarios. Role of rifampin in these patients. When do you put it? Why do you put it?
See, according to the current guidelines, there is no role of rifampicin in native wall endocarditis. Be it in MRSA also. Even in MRSA, there is no role of rifampicin according to the current guidelines of American Heart Association and the IDSA. The only role of rifampicin is when you are treating a prosthetic valve endocarditis.
So would you put rifampin as your empiric drug of choice in addition to the two that you said if a patient has got prosthetic valve?
This is prosthetic valve as an empiric therapy.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, empiric therapy. I'll put it only if it's a intravascular device is there. For example, a CIED or you're talking about a pacemaker where the lead is probably infected. You find a thrombus there or a vegetation there. I would add rifampicin in that scenario. Or a prosthetic valve endocarditis. Empirically, yes, I would add rifampicin because that is where probably there is broad studies which show that addition of rifampicin to vancomycin and gentamicin actually it enhances the antibiotic penetration into the foreign this thing. into the foreign vegetation, foreign body. So I would definitely add rifampicin if it's a prosthetic valve, but not on a native valve.
And when you add rifampicin to prosthetic valve, do you continue the other two, vancomycin, ceftriaxone, as the same, or you change that?
See, the thing is that when we are considering a prosthetic valve endocarditis, so generally the antibiotic regime is it depends on what you are trying to treat. Because prosthetic valve, it's less than 1 year. It's less than 1 year. The antibiotic empirical antibiotic therapy is not ceftriaxone. It is vancomycin with either gentamicin and cefepime, along with the addition of rifampicin. So
You
if
would
the
put 4
prosthetic,
antibiotics.
so if the prosthetic valve is more than 1 year old, then the antibiogram is same as the native valve endocarditis. You
Right.
understand what the point is?
Yes. I think that is very clearly written in the textbook, and I'm glad that is what. So for you, that is what you would follow in practical life as well. That if
That's
prosthetic
what
valve
I
is more than
follow.
1 year.
We had exactly a similar case where the patient had a CIED, and then I'm sorry, I'm diverting actually, and
Please.
digressing from what you, but we had a patient with a CIED where the patient was not willing to, for the and the permanent pacemaker, the patient was not willing for the pacemaker to be removed. So the ideal thing when you have an infected endocarditis with a pacemaker lead in situ is to remove the pacemaker, right? That is what all the guidelines say.
Right.
But the only thing where we don't do it is probably when the patient is not willing for it, or probably the risk of pulling out a pacemaker is too high. Then we actually added a regime of vancomycin, cefepime. Gentamicin was added, but again removed because the patient had some nephrotoxicity, and we added rifampicin. And mind you, the dose of rifampicin is not the normal dose which we use, just 600 milligrams once daily for patients with tuberculosis. It's something like 300 mg 8th hourly. It's a pretty high dose, actually, what we use for infected endocarditis.
So in your current practice, you follow the same thing what most of the textbooks say, that less than 1 year you treat them aggressively, more than 1 year you treat them like any other endocarditis.
It's supposed to be done that way only. That is the reason why these guidelines have come out.
Okay. Guidelines are there, but many of the times we have our own way of treating because we have learned. So that is what one of the purpose of doing this is, to understand that how we do on the top of what the guidelines suggest. Okay. I open the discussion for anybody who has got any comments on empiric antibiotics in infective endocarditis. We are talking on a very specific subset. If anyone has got any other comments or questions, please unmute yourself or raise your hand. Otherwise, we'll go to the second case. Okay, if not, then okay, Pawan sir, let me unmute you. Yes, Pawan sir, please, your thoughts.
We have two types of presentations. One is a patient directly coming for fever. Let's say somebody with an MR who's not been admitted and not had any other infection prior. So for example, you have cardiac patients coming with urinary infections, pyelonephritis. There is a hematogenic spread of that particular E. coli going and sitting there onto the wall. So we see these things more commonly rather than somebody just having an MR mitral valve problem and then coming and having endocarditis. So most of the time we see patients developing UTIs, bacteremia from E. coli, then developing endocarditis, or somebody had a central line from last time admission and then developing endocarditis. So there are intrusions not community acquired. This means the patients have been in hospital for some other ailment, some other bacteremia, where the bacterial nidus goes and sits there on the wall and then causes this. This is the more common presentations that we see. So I think there the antibiotics, again, you have to vis-a-vis think about what was the last time you, for example, somebody coming back with an endocarditis after 3 weeks or 4 weeks of prior hospitalization. He had, let's say, an E. coli bacteremia or a Klebsiella bacteremia, and now has come with endocarditis. So you have to look at the temporal relationship between that infection and was he stable enough, or was he continuing to have fever during this period of time when he went home. So you have to adjust and think about these things also. It's just not always black and white. So we need to look into those things also.
We have got cases for that, sir. We'll discuss each one of them. I actually have, that is why I have like few clinical scenarios to discuss. Dr. Anil, you raised your hand. You have got something to add. I'm unmuting you. Dr. Anil.
Good evening, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, I want to just know the reason of not adding rifampin greater than 1 year of CID.
Okay, so the question is why not? Why are we dividing prosthetic valve in less than 1 year versus more than 1 year? Guru sir, could you just throw some insight on why that happened?
I'm so sorry. Actually, my whole this thing got muted. I don't know how. I just missed all the discussion which Pawan and you were speaking. Just repeat in just a small.
Yeah, so Pawan sir was highlighting different case scenarios where we can make a very smart guess about what antibiotics should work. And I do have cases for that. So Pawan sir's thought we will revisit again. One of the questions from the audience was, why is prosthetic valve endocarditis divided in less than 1 year versus more than 1 year in terms of adding rifampin? Why not add rifampin in every prosthetic valve case? What is your
So yeah, see what happens is less than 1 year we are talking more about cons or Coagulase negative staph aureus as the organism, because we feel that bug we got from the hospital when you open the chest wall and you put the prosthetic valve in situ. So that bug is probably causing the infected endocarditis in the less than 1 year time frame. So we use rifampicin because this bug is particularly resistant to the vegetation which forms. Actually, the bug goes and hides in the vegetation. So rifampicin actually makes it more susceptible for the antibiotic to penetrate and kill that bug. And cons is very notorious for it. So the difference lies in basically the organism which you're trying to cover. That is why, hence, the addition of rifampicin and cefepime is again for a hospital-acquired infective endocarditis to cover bugs like Pseudomonas. So that is why the difference in the antibiogram for less than 1 year and more than 1 year prosthetic valve endocarditis.
Perfect. Thank you so much, sir. And also we need to understand that these valves, they are not endothelialized early on. So early on, you are actually dealing with a pure dead tissue on which there is very little blood perfusion. But as later on, when the endothelialization occurs, then neovascularization occurs, and your antibiotic penetration is better in that way. So let me go to second case, and Praneeth, I'm going to get back to you for your thought, and then we will do the same thing like we did for this one. So case number 2, 60-year-old male. He's admitted with leg cellulitis. There is no skin breakdown, just erythema, pain, and classic cellulitis fever. He is on conservative management on ceftriaxone and clindamycin. He was given oral antibiotic for 5 days as an outpatient. He failed, so now he's admitted and he's on IV on these 2 antibiotics. He has persistent fever on day 4, and an echo revealed small mitral valve vegetation with moderate MR. No signs of heart failure. His blood cultures were sent on day 2 of admission, and now it is day 4. And blood culture on day 2 of admission is negative so far. And remember, day 2 of admission means he already took 5 days of oral antibiotics and 24 hours of IV antibiotic. You send another blood culture, and the switch your antibiotics to ampicillin plus gentamicin plus clindamycin. Now is day 8 of admission. All the blood cultures are negative so far, and this guy has taken 4 days of ampicillin, gentamicin, clindamycin for your empiric infective endocarditis and bacteremia. But blood culture has never grown up anything. So how would you go for it? Would you continue the same antibiotic? Do you agree with this antibiotic choice? Would you change it to something else? You don't have bacteria right now. How would you go about it?
Yeah, so ceftriaxone, clindamycin, then ampi, clinda, and genta. So most of the gram positive and the common gram negative organisms are taken care of. So even despite giving them, if the fever is continuing and it progressed to endocarditis, then I'm trying to see that the organism is resistant to these things, so antibiotics need to be upgraded. Personally speaking, I would be switching to vancomycin and one of the higher antibiotics, something like either these carbapenems or one of those higher group. Though I'm not very comfortable, I would take the help of either the critical care or the physician in this regard.
Guru sir, back to you. These kind of cases we see often. Patient is admitted for something, antibiotic is being given appropriately, blood cultures are negative. Now with the new antibiotic, he's doing fine. But the question here is, can we continue this new antibiotic for long term, or we should do something?
So you mean to say that he has differed with the new
Yes.
antibiotic?
On day 4, when you escalated his antibiotic, now it is day 8, he is fine, but cultures are negative.
Right. So one thing is that I would drop the clindamycin once the therapy for cellulitis is over, because clindamycin doesn't have a role in infective endocarditis anyway. Okay, so clindamycin doesn't have any role in infective endocarditis. It is a very poor antibiotic for infective endocarditis. But yeah, having said that, because there is a vegetation in the mitral valve, it is difficult to say whether that is still the cause. That is the cause of, because when you give for cellulitis or soft tissue infection, probably 14 days of antibiotics is more than enough. But because this patient happens to have a vegetation on the mitral valve, I would continue the ceftriaxone for a duration of 4 weeks.
You would continue ceftriaxone along with gentamicin, or just ceftriaxone alone?
No, ceftriaxone for 4 weeks, gentamicin for 2 weeks. That is what I would do. I would drop the clindamycin, because it doesn't make sense for covering, because it doesn't cover infective endocarditis anyway.
Okay, perfect. So I have an open question for anyone. This is another infective endocarditis where there is a secondary infection which probably will get better, but we don't have a bacteria and you will be treating blindly. One thought is to give the patient antibiotic holiday for 3-4 days, let fever come back, or even if the fever does not come back, do a repeat blood culture at that time, get the bug, so that we are in a better shape of giving specific antibiotic. Is there anyone in the audience who does that, or who would follow this kind of strategy of giving antibiotic holiday with a dire necessity of identifying what bacteria is there? Anyone has got any thoughts on that? Pawan sir, your thought. Would you give this patient antibiotic holiday just to know what bacteria is there?
I think we can do that. See, what happens is, once you are given for, let's say, see, what if that is the same endocarditis is the same bug that is causing cellulitis. If the cellulitis is improving with the antibiotic that you're giving, so you can expect that the same thing would do for the endocarditis. Now, 2 weeks of antibiotics, whatever cellulitis, if it is, let's say, 10 days of antibiotics you're given for cellulitis and it's improving, get a review echo, see how it is. Is the vegetation increasing in size? How's the wall doing? If everything is fine, then I think you can stop antibiotics, give 2-3 days gap, see if there is any new onset fever coming back again, how the white cells is going. So that can give you a window of opportunity to send a recent cultures, or you can do some sort of an PCR kind of testing. Nowadays we have all these kinds of armamentarium. You can do an PCR, blood PCRs, to pick up some bugs which are not in that concentration to grow on a culture, but probably because we are looking at the genes of bacteria, you may pick up, you may be lucky enough to get some.
Perfect, thank you. Anybody else has got any other thoughts on these culture negative endocarditis? Next question I have for Jhansi madam.
See, Dr. Anup.
Yes.
What is the culture report of cellulitis?
Ma'am, cellulitis, because there is no skin breakdown, the culture has not been sent. It is just a superficial cellulitis. They have not done any IND on this patient.
Are you sure that this is the source for infective endocarditis?
No, we don't know this.
So these may be two different entities, might be. Cellulitis and endocarditis are two different entities.
Okay, how do we differentiate this?
So we cannot always say cellulitis because patient has cellulitis. So the bacteria has gone to the mitral valve and causing the endocarditis is only a theoretical assumption. But to me, how many bottles you are sending and at what time you are sending? Nowadays, there are a lot of research in this blood culture sample collection as well as the volume of the blood collected for the diagnosis of infective endocarditis. So maximum you have to collect 60 ml. right now we are not doing that one. And also at the same time, you have to select one aerobic bottle and another anaerobic bottle, so that if you are missing any anaerobic organism, it will pick up. And one more thing is, these antibiotic, on antibiotic, there are few bottles, green bottles with a resin filled bottles, where they will neutralize the antibiotic and will encourage the growth of the organism. And one more thing is, some unusual organisms like Bartonella, it don't grow in any bottles. You have to do PCR only.
So, ma'am, my third scenario was a direct question to you. So I'm going to have you speak on this for the next few minutes.
Yeah.
Culture negative endocarditis. How can you help us other than guiding us to take the antibiotic, take the blood sample correct way? How can you help us? PCR, serology, alternate way of diagnosis. How can lab help us identify the bacteria?
First is the primary requirement is blood culture bottle sending. Either you can take the blood samples simultaneously or at a different timings. That is your wish and convenience of the patient. And then after 48 hours, if you don't see the growth, it might be a culture negative endocarditis or a fungal endocarditis. Here in the blood culture bottles, we can identify only yeast cells, not the mycelial forms like Aspergillus. So for that, we have to do a PCR technique or a serology technique. Serology, there are nowadays Aspergillus specific antibodies can be detected in the blood, or you can do the PCR for Aspergillus. I don't know how many people are doing Aspergillus PCR because of the non-specificity and interference with other fungus. That's why I think nobody is doing for Aspergillus PCR. And another one is those bacteria which cannot be grown in the lab should be detected by PCR only.
Ma'am, this may be just a very naive question. Can you do PCR for the bacteria that we have?
You can send the blood cultures. We will incubate for 2 to 3 days. Then we will take out and do a panel.
Okay.
And what is your most suspicious organism is very important. Based on that, we can choose and do a panel testing. That too experimentally, if we can detect, we can continue in future also.
And how about serology of these fancy bacteria? We talk about Coxella, Burnetii, Brucella, Mycoplasma, Bartonella, all this.
The only indirect immunofluorescence is very helpful in these atypical mycobacteria. That you can try. Few centers are doing indirect immunofluorescence testing. But serology is non-specific and it is very difficult to confirm the organism.
Ma'am, do we have the facility to do PCR and serology for these bacteria?
Serology, we are sending it out. In the serology, you have to specify the organism.
Okay.
Otherwise, it's very difficult to do entire serology panel is not possible also.
Okay. Praneeth,
Anup, can I just intervene? See, regarding going back to the case which you had asked whether we should cover for infective endocarditis for 4 weeks or not. See, the only change you made from Monosef and clindamycin was adding gentamicin because you thought that you protocolized your treatment for infective endocarditis.
Yes.
So what I feel is anyway he has received around 4 to 5 days of gentamicin. So why not finish up the course as you would do for infective endocarditis? Second is that, blood cultures which madam is talking about for infective endocarditis is very, very specific. Actually, if you go through the ideal way of collecting blood cultures, it is 3 sets of blood cultures, each culture 2 hours apart. Okay, is the ideal way of collecting blood culture. If you're in a hurry, then the first and last culture should be at least an hour apart. That is the ideal way of collecting blood culture. And regarding the serological test you're asking about, we are doing brucella in our lab, madam. Like we had a couple of brucella cases. So they are basically brucella, your Bartonella, Legionella, Chlamydia psittaci, and Coxiella bonnet. So these are the main things which we try to look for by serological tests. Others are all difficult to even detect because HACCP organisms we don't have much to in terms of diagnosis. Probably a PCR would help in them.
Right, perfect. Few hands are up. I'm going to take their comments. Praneeth, you go first. Wait. Okay, Praneeth, you are unmuted now.
Yeah. So this question is to Jhansi Madam. Madam, of late we hear these reports of organisms which at least I did not learn during my medicine reading the Anantanarayan, something like Stenotrophomonas and
Yeah.
Acinetobacter with some species and all, which kind of makes me a bit uncomfortable. How do I react looking at these organisms? Are these new things which are developed, or how important? What is their importance?
So these are not new developments. Bacteria are there, but right now they have separated into different genuses. Genus Pseudomonas can be divided into Stenotrophomonas, Burkholderia, like that, based on few biochemical reaction differences. Like that, Acinetobacter, from the beginning, it is a well-known organism in hospital-acquired infections, not in community-acquired infections. So, if the patient is staying in the hospital for more than 48 hours, and you are detecting Acinetobacter in bloodstream or in ET secretions, it is definitely a hospital-acquired infection. And also multi-drug resistant strain. We should be very careful in treating those patients.
Perfect. Thank you, ma'am. Pawan sir, I'm unmuting you. Go ahead.
Yeah, regarding the panels, there are a few labs elsewhere outside that are doing this endocarditis panel. So in case if you're in doubt, they do the routine things and some bugs of the HACCP group. They won't do the complete Coxiella and other things, but they'll do some bugs of the HACCP group and the routine bugs they will do PCR. So you have an endocarditis panel, you can just ask for it and it will be done.
Sir, give us a name of any of such lab.
iGenetics is one they do it. So
iGenetics.
recently also we sent Guru's one panel.
So my question to you is, as a clinician, they are doing it as a lab, but as a clinician, do you find those helpful?
See, it depends on your suspicion, level of suspicion also. If they're doing these tests only, and if you think there is something like a staph comes in when you have a cellulitis and this, if it's hitting the clinical criteria, because see, when you're looking at PCR, you're looking at genes, something like the virus that we are doing the PCRs now. So even if there is some bacteria which is inadvertently entered, you can pick that suddenly. So what happens is ultimately you have to pick and choose. You have to clinically you have to match and see whether this works for that clinical diagnosis. Is it matching? See, somebody let's say coming from community acquired like cellulitis and was never been hospitalized, let's say the first time is coming in, and if you grow blood Acinetobacter and PCR, you will not pick this up as Acinetobacter is not something that is causing the endocarditis here. Okay, if suppose is a dialysis patient, he is in and out of the hospital for so many days. He has been intubated last time for some pneumonia, aspiration. Now he's grown Acinetobacter before. Now he develops an Acinetobacter. You can think that probably Acinetobacter is causing the endocarditis, but then otherwise it would not match, right? Clinically, you have to any report you have to look at. See, there's a lab will only give data whatever that grows, right? You have to make it clinically judgment. The clinical judgment should be that is yours. That is where the clinician comes into the picture. And lab only reports what they grow. See, ET grows Candida most of the time, but we all know Candida never causes pneumonia, even in immunocompromised patients. So they will report because it is growing there, as simple as that. So you take that as a consideration and say, okay, this is a Candida pneumonia, because Candida never causes pneumonia, even in the most severest immunocompromised patients. So you have to use your clinical judgment in these situations.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Anup,
Yes, madam.
one more thing is such aberrant reports, if you are receiving, it is better to give some clinical picture to the lab people. Then we will decide which is a pathogen or which is not. If you don't give clinical picture, we will give whatever grows on the plates.
Right.
That is one thing. One more thing is, you are telling about the PCR. Dr. Pavan is telling. PCR also, it should have a minimum number of bacilli in the blood. That too 1 CFU per ml. Unless that quantity of bacilli are there in the blood, it don't give positivity. So any negative PCR is also, you cannot rule out completely the bacterial endocarditis. So be careful in interpreting the report. Based on that, you cannot stop treatment or restart treatment.
Perfect. Thank you so much, ma'am. I'm going to go to my next case. And by the way, all these cases, we saw these in our daily practice in the last 1-2 years. The numbers may not be exactly the same because I may not be recollecting those numbers in the same way, but they are all real cases. So we are not talking anything which are made up. I actually make it a point that in the huddle, we only talk of cases which we have seen, because otherwise in the nature, we can just make up anything. So this is my fourth case I'm discussing. And then again, Praneeth, I'm going to start with you and then we go around. So this is a 48-year-old male. He came to OPD, non-specific symptoms. In fact, really no major symptoms. Had been experiencing low-grade fever, touching maximum 100. He got an echo done outside in one of the local labs, which showed mitral valve vegetation, and they referred him for cardiology for further management. He comes to me, echo shows severe mitral regurgitation with mitral valve vegetation, which is confirmed in our echo. He has got no other symptoms. His exam is not suggestive of heart failure. He is afebrile, and other than systolic murmur, there is nothing else. We got blood cultures, 3 sets. I don't know if we did 2 hours apart, but we got 3 sets blood culture. All 3 are positive for, and these names we'll have to remember. I have it written down. Streptococcus parasanguinis that grew in all 3 blood cultures. And this Streptococcus parasanguinis is sensitive to, I'm going to put some names here and I will ask you your drug of choice. So oral drugs that this Streptococcus is sensitive to is levoflox, moxiflox, and linezolid. IV, clindamycin and vancomycin. It is resistant to ampicillin, tetracycline, cefotaxime, and ceftriaxone. So I'm going to say it again. Sensitive to oral tablets, levofloxacin, moxifloxacin, and linezolid. Sensitive to intravenous, clindamycin and vancomycin. And I'm telling you, these are the only names which were tested for. And I don't have all the antibiotics because they probably didn't test for all of them. And resistant for ampicillin, tetracycline, cefotaxime, and ceftriaxone. So I have 2 questions for you, Praneeth, and then we'll open it for discussion. Question number 1, will you admit this patient or start outpatient-based therapy? And second, what will be your choice of antibiotic? Praneeth.
So because he's clinically stable, I would prefer him to be managed on an OPD basis only. Probably put a PICC line or probably one of the single lumen central line for the sake of convenience because of long duration of therapy. I would not give him oral therapy. I would give him IV therapy, even though you mentioned oral drugs. And with all the drugs that you have mentioned, because ceftriaxone is out, I probably would put him on vancomycin and linezolid as a combination. And linezolid also I'll try to give it as an IV, and will probably keep him under follow-up frequently. Provided it's easy if he probably stays in city, but probably if he stays at somewhere remote, it would be difficult. But I would prefer to manage him as an outpatient basis.
Okay, perfect. Guru sir, your thought process on this. 2 questions: admit, not admit, and oral therapy versus IV therapy. Choice of antibiotic.
Yeah, see, Anup, there's an interesting study. There's a Danish study which says about It's called POET study actually. It's a partial oral antibiotic therapy for endocarditis. It had some 400 candidates and where they assessed using oral therapy for endocarditis. So, but probably they assessed giving antibiotics orally to a patient with infected endocarditis who are not very sick and who can tolerate oral antibiotic therapy on outpatient basis. And they found that therapy was non-inferior to intravenous therapy. But having said that, the gold standard still remains. I think this remains to there are further studies which are going on to assess oral therapy for infected endocarditis. As of now, the mainstay of therapy for infected endocarditis still remains intravenous or parenteral therapy. I would manage the patient on a on outpatient basis, but drug of choice will be vancomycin, no linezolid, because it's a streptococcus. There is no rationale of combining linezolid with vancomycin. One on another doesn't give much benefit. And anyway, linezolid is a very inferior drug according to the IDSA guidelines for management of infective endocarditis. Though we do use it, it's not out of the box like clindamycin. But vancomycin for 4 weeks probably because it's a moderately penicillin resistant streptococcus which we are dealing with. So drug of choice probably would be vancomycin as a monotherapy for 4 weeks.
Okay, anyone else in the audience who wants to add any comment on this particular clinical scenario? Let me pick on few names. We'll just ask for your thought process. Dr. Prithvi, how would you manage this patient? Question is very specific: outpatient versus inpatient, and oral antibiotic versus IV antibiotic. Dr. Prithvi, you are unmuted.
So, hi, good evening, sir. So, as his clinical condition is stable, I would also prefer, sir, and ask him to monitor closely regarding the symptoms progression. And I'll also choose vancomycin, sir, as a monotherapy for 4 weeks, sir. And symptoms progress, definitely I'll admit him.
Okay, we'll ask other people. Let's see who is there. Dr. Naresh Gunda Puneni, I hope I'm saying your name correct. Dr. Naresh, what would you do in this kind of cases? Dr. Naresh, you are unmuted. Okay, we are having difficulty hearing you. We'll come back to you. Dr. Naveen, I'm unmuting you. How would you manage this patient?
Yeah, good evening, everyone. Is it audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Yeah. My choice will be to manage the patient on outpatient basis with monotherapy with vancomycin, which is inadequate. We can try. I go with what Dr. Guru said.
Okay, perfect. Pawan sir, I'm going to ask you this question. What if we compromise? We give him 1 week of IV vancomycin and then give him oral linezolid or something else. Why can't we do this?
Frankly, that's what will be done in clinical practice.
So that's exactly what I did. But I want some justification.
See, I mean, that's what happens. See, everybody, you have to get vancomycin twice a day, right? And you need a cannula in going in, and then you have to give it every day, and then you keep following up the creatinine levels. So most of them they keep running behind another hospital to another hospital in the hope that they'll get a easier alternative, some other doctor who will give them pills rather than injection. But ultimately, like I said, I mean, if you see this, basically the sangus is nothing but it is usually an oral bacteria. You get it from the dental procedures. These are the endocarditis that you routinely see. So, I mean, like Bruce said, linezolid is something that you don't usually prescribe for endocarditis, but there is an ease of giving it. That's why people prefer to give linezolid. But we are all happy, comfortable giving vancomycin in these situations. So I think that's what usually happens when you look at the situation. You give for a week of vanco, then probably another 2 weeks you give linezolid and see how things are. No problems, as long as you are following up the patient and looking at his endocarditis. If the patient is not spiking any fever, you are doing review echoes every time the patient comes for follow-up. I think you can do that. And we always err on these things when we deal with in clinical practice.
Perfect. Thank you.
Anu,
Yes, ma'am.
my question, small question.
Yes, ma'am.
When you are giving IV vancomycin on OP basis, how frequently you do the drug monitoring?
Okay, that was my question. I was reserving it for physicians here. So let me actually. So I'll ask these questions to my audience here. So let me actually pick few names here because I'm really interested in seeing what people think. Dr. Shankar, I'm unmuting you. Dr. B. Shankar, could you please share your thought about this case? How would you manage admit versus OP and antibiotics? And also, Jhansi madam's question, do you check vancomycin levels?
Usually, when we give a parenteral vancomycin, I prefer to get them admitted, and frequently we monitor the drug levels also. And at the same time, renal function also, we have to check it. This is my way of treating. I prefer a patient getting admitted.
Perfect. Thank you, sir. I'm going to pick up some other. Dr. Hari Kiran, I'm unmuting you. Question about this case, OP versus IP, choice of antibiotic and vancomycin levels.
Yeah, good evening, sir.
Yeah.
So sorry to say, I mean, I had an interruption in between while you were mentioning the other drugs which were sensitive or resistant to that thing. Can you come again on that?
Yes, absolutely. So bacteria is Strep parasanguinis, which is sensitive to oral drugs sensitive to are levofloxacin, moxifloxacin, and linezolid. IV is sensitive to clindamycin and vancomycin. Resistant to ampicillin, tetracycline, cefotaxime, and ceftriaxone.
Okay, sir. And regarding the size of vegetation and any evidence of paravalvular abscess, the extent of the vegetation or extent of bacterial infection.
So vegetation was measured to be 0.9 centimeter square and severe MR, but no abscess, no any other paravalvular pathology.
Severe MR, was it due to anatomical non-coaptation or the any perforation?
So we didn't see any anatomic problem. We just saw that valve were not coapting because of that vegetation sitting right at the tip of the valve.
Okay, sir. But in my view, if I feel that the vegetation is not so large, I will go for oral antibiotics on OP basis, sir. And then reviewing the echo once in a week or twice, once in 2 weeks. Levofloxacin would be my choice.
And would you give a single drug at that time, or would you give two drugs for this kind of cases?
Oral, I'll go with 2, sir. I mean,
2. Okay.
Yes.
And when you give injectable vancomycin in any patient, do you check blood levels, or how frequently you check blood levels?
No, sir. I haven't checked any patient with. I mean, my experience with treating infective endocarditis is very few. And in those patients, I did not follow up them with drug levels. I just followed them with the creatinine levels.
Okay, perfect. Guru sir, I have a question. Yes, sir.
Anu, can I interject here?
Sir, you interject, but I'm also going to ask you a question. You can do both things. So the question for you is vanc level 10 to 15 versus 15 to 20, and then whatever thought you have got, you can answer
15
both.
to 20. Actually, for MRSAs, it is 15 to 20. I think for Streptococcus, it will be 10 to 15 trough levels. It's important to mention the trough levels actually.
Yeah.
Levels can be the peak level or trough level. The trough level is very important. Number one. Second is, I think the idea of this meeting is to change what we are practicing according to guidelines. Okay. So what we are talking about is guidelines right now. When we talk about guidelines, there is a very clear-cut guideline that there is no role of oral antibiotic therapy as of now for infective endocarditis. Real time, what we're doing is different. I mean, there are a lot of things which we do. But according to guidelines right now, if you go and pick up any standard guideline for infective endocarditis, there is an ongoing study for oral antibiotic therapy. Fluoroquinolones are not to be used as monotherapy. They're only used as a adjunct, or when you can't use gentamicin along with a primary drug. Quinolones are never primary therapy for infective endocarditis. Okay. So I think the way we approach this case is use vancomycin monitor the trough levels and monitor the kidney function probably once in 3 days, because that's what happens.
Guru sir, there seems to be some network issue. Guru sir, are you able to hear me?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now. We heard about your comment on the guidelines and no role of oral antibiotic, and then there was some network interruption after that.
So, so that's what I mean. What we do is probably improvise. And one more thing, one word of caution on linezolid: it's not a very safe drug actually. The moment you use linezolid beyond 2 weeks, there is a high chance of irreversible peripheral neuropathy, which linezolid can cause, which a lot of people are not aware of actually. And second is a dose-dependent thrombocytopenia with linezolid, which occurs quite frequently. So the moment you use linezolid beyond 2 weeks, so the setting is different. So, for example, when we are talking about, for example, actinomycosis, where linezolid is one of the drug of choices, we don't use linezolid because the moment you use linezolid beyond 2 weeks time, peripheral neuropathy can be irreversible with linezolid. That is one really devastating this thing, and it causes severe severe painful neuropathy. So, I mean, that's why I think linezolid should be really a word of caution on using linezolid so frequently in outpatient. It looks very tempting to use linezolid because it's an oral drug. Bioavailability of intravenous and oral are the same, but the side effects are not really very simple with linezolid. Vancomycin is relatively more easier to use, and probably side effects are also reversible. Your renal acute kidney injury which occurs with vancomycin is reversible the moment you stop vancomycin. So I think that is what I want to make a point about linezolid actually use.
Perfect. Thank you so much, sir. And as I was mentioning when we got you disconnected for a moment, that we do want to talk about science guidelines and everything. They are written for a reason. But a lot of things that we do in our daily life is a lot of practical issues. What we do in our angioplasty, what we do in our daily basis. Sometimes we ourselves on purpose make these compromises because and ideally patient should take IV antibiotic for 6 weeks, but what he does once he goes home, nobody knows anything. So many of the times we are left with a choice where patient won't take any antibiotic versus taking something orally, and lot of the times we make those discounts. But point well taken. There is no current robust scientific statement to approve oral antibiotics over IV. I have a last case which I'm not going to discuss a lot. I'm just going to ask Jhansi madam about what would be her drug of choice for this, and then we will close the session. We are already 8:31. So ma'am, this case, you know it very well because I picked your brain multiple times. 74-year-old female, status post TAVR, transcatheter aortic valve replacement, 1 month back. She had fever for 2 days and 1 day of diarrhea. Blood culture was done at the time of fever, which was positive for Enterococcus faecalis. Echocardiogram showed no evidence of vegetation. So far, we only have bacteremia, but no echo evidence of vegetation. But this patient has a freshly placed prosthetic valve 1 month ago. We looked at the sensitivity. The Enterococcus faecalis is sensitive to, and I'm going to again put these names, benzyl penicillin, gentamicin, erythromycin, teicoplanin, vancomycin, linezolid, tigecycline, and nitrofurantoin. So nitrofurantoin, we take it out.
No. Yes.
Nitrofurantoin, tigecycline, we take it out. We are just going to repeat the names which are relevant to us, which are benzyl penicillin.
Hello.
Has a valve placed 1 month ago. What would you suggest, ma'am, for the antibiotic choice for this patient?
So if you are thinking it is a infective endocarditis of prosthetic valve, is it?
Ma'am, so far we don't have an evidence, but we are highly suspicious because there is a fresh valve sitting there.
Okay. So only one blood culture is positive, or two, or both are positive?
Ma'am, we took 6 blood cultures. 3 of the 6 are positive. Other 3 are still cooking.
Okay. All are showing Enterococcus.
All are showing Enterococcus faecalis. Yes.
For Enterococcus fecalis, that too suspicious prosthetic valve endocarditis, we will go for a 2-drug regime. Instead of penicillin, I will go for vancomycin plus gentamicin. Gentamicin we don't give, that too Enterococcus high level gentamicin we will give. So dose adjustment is very important. Otherwise, monotherapy with vanco.
And high level, you mean 3 milligrams per kilogram, if I'm
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay. Guru sir, your last comment on this, and then we'll close the session after this.
See, when you are sensitive to benzyl penicillin, I don't know, I probably would use a combination of ampicillin with ceftriaxone is also a fair enough combination for infective endocarditis with Enterococcus fecalis.
Guru Prasad, for Enterococcus, ceftriaxone don't work. Any cephalosporins don't work.
Madam, that is for Enterococcus faecium, madam. For fecalis.
Fecalis also don't work. We don't give any cephalosporin sensitivity. You observe the sensitivity pattern.
Madam, actually, for fecalis, when you have a sensitivity for benzyl penicillin, we can combine ampicillin with either gentamicin, or if you are worried about nephrotoxicity, ceftriaxone is also a good exchange for gentamicin, madam, along with ampicillin.
So the discussion again is that in Enterococcus fecalis, can we believe on cephalosporin, because that was one of the discussion where cephalosporin can be trusted or not. Pawan sir, what is your thought on this? You have your hands up. What is your thought? You have been unmuted.
Yeah, Enterococcus cephalosporins don't work. You have to remember this. It's a simple thing. Enterococcus fecalis. Usually we remember that IS is sensitive, usually to penicillins, benzyl penicillin. Occasionally you get it even penicillin resistant, but majority of the time fecalis is sensitive to penicillin. Though we think that cephalosporins are penicillin, they don't work against Enterococcus. There is one drug, the piperacillin tazobactam, that has inherent sensitivity to, it can work for Enterococcus fecalis. Faecium, on the other hand, is resistant inherently to penicillins. If there is a faecium, don't think about anything, directly go for vanc in that setting. But fecalis, penicillins are fine. So Guru, like you said, ampicillin maybe were enough. But like you said, the gut sepsis here, that is where the Enterococcus is actually entering into the blood from. Rather than endocarditis, probably she has the diarrhea, there is a gut sepsis there. Enterococcus is a gut bacteria. So I don't know if the patient has endocarditis, but here it is basically from the gut that she's got. So Enterococcus, ampicillin, yes, or vancomycin, either of those. If it is resistant to penicillins, then you have to directly go up to vanc.
So,
Anup, can I interject here? I'll just interrupt here.
Yes, Guru, please.
I'll tell you why I said ceftriaxone and ampicillin. Actually, I'll share with all of you the pic which is there in either in Braunwald and Harrison. There's a concept of piggybacking of antibiotic. So here the cephalosporin actually piggybacks on the ampicillin, and it is used as a exchange for, especially for example, you're saying 74-year-old lady. I'll be really reluctant to use vancomycin with gentamicin combination because of its inherent nephrotoxicity. This lady is going to land up with acute kidney injury. You tell me after 5 days you'll give a consultation for a nephrologist to have a look at her, and you're again forced to go back onto your antibiotics. So it's important to look at the age, the comorbidities which the lady is having, and to go again according to what science says. So science says that ampicillin with ceftriaxone is a good exchange for a patient instead of ampicillin with gentamicin. Whenever we are using gentamicin along with ampicillin, it is called piggybacking, or as madam was saying, high synergy. So there is a role of combining ampicillin with ceftriaxone, and Enterococcus fecalis is the only place where we use this combination of ampicillin with ceftriaxone. I'll share the literature with you.
Sir,
but anyway,
direct question to you. So direct question to you.
Yeah.
Why not ticoplanin? Why we don't have love for ticoplanin? Why we are loving vancomycin so much?
Oh, I love ticoplanin, Anup. You don't really know how much I love ticoplanin, because
so why you did not suggest ticoplanin on this?
So see, why I'm trying to tell you, when you have a sensitive bug, you have a bug which is sensitive, two penicillins, benzyl penicillin. Why not use? Why use teicoplanin here? Again, there is a difference between real-time usage and using two drugs for elderly lady with a TAVR who has got a high procedure like a TAVR. You don't want to take a risk. So in the real-time world, probably use teicoplanin. So I'm talking about according to scientific guidelines, when it is sensitive to benzyl penicillin, I will use a combination of ampicillin with ceftriaxone. But yes, if you say that, sir, the patient has undergone a TAVR, it's an expensive procedure, and I really don't want the valve to get infected, why don't you use straight away, monotherapy with teicoplanin? That's a good enough choice to use because it does have a very good coverage against enterococcus.
So second question, ampicillin at home, how do you manage? That's a more practical issue.
Yeah, I mean, that's what dose of ampicillin is quite high for enterococcus. It's something like, if I'm not mistaken, I don't remember often, it's 2 gram every 4th hourly. So it is really a challenge to give. So yeah, if you talk about real-time world and using the ease of administering a drug, probably teicoplanin will be the drug of choice to use in this scenario.
So even for enterococcus fecalis, you'll be okay giving teicoplanin plus ceftriaxone or teicoplanin monotherapy?
I don't have to monitor trough levels here.
Okay.
I don't have to monitor the creatinine very frequently. It's got the ease of administering on once daily basis once you are done with the loading dose. So it's like makes life simpler for the clinician and the patient also.
Okay, perfect. Sir, we are 8:40, and while we do want to discuss further, we have to close the session at some point. So I thank all of you for joining. I will invite individual comments from pretty much our first time visitors here. Pawan sir, you visited this huddle for the first time. I'm sure it's a different format that you have been to most of the other webinars. Give us your constructive criticism regarding the format, not the content, but the format.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, it's great actually. I didn't know that you were doing this, man. This is something you should also showcase, that you are doing this to rest of the guys, not just cardiology. We'll also be interested in joining it. So this is the first time that it was broadcasted across in the group. Then that's how we got to know that this is going on. So I think you should put it across in a lot of other platforms where people would come and join.
Sure. Guru sir, this is the second time you're joining us. What can we do to get you more frequently visiting the huddle?
I don't get to know, Anup, that you are actually holding it. And today, that day, you remember, you just messaged me and then you gave me a call.
Yeah.
Frankly, that was the time I was interested in, because the last time we had a very, very good discussion about COVID, if you remember.
Yes.
So I was really interested in joining the session. I think I'll be more interested in joining for sessions. And as Pawan was saying, probably should showcase it. It's a very interesting concept which you have.
Perfect. Jhansi madam, you joined us for the first time. What is your comment on the session?
The session is very nice, but only thing is the case presentation, a little bit detailed presentation is required, and also including the necessary pathologist and biochemist is also required for this in the other cases, not these infective endocarditis, other cases. So that complete case will be covered, and also the treatment protocols, and maybe medicine people, they can tell the treatment options.
Right, perfect. So we had a thought process like this, like all of our during our MBBS days, we used to have a clinical pathology conference. I designed this session with the idea that we are not going to do any presentations or videos, so we are limited a bit in terms of what we can discuss with an audio, because I still believe we don't need to be tagged into a computer or a screen.
No. It's a computer is not necessary.
Right.
In your talk only, you can say lab investigations are important parameters. These are these, and what is the differential diagnosis and how we are going to manage the patient.
Right. So last session we had Dr. Shanti Naidu giving her entrance on the lab parameter, and then we keep getting, sometimes we have dietitians on the board, sometimes we have wellness center doctors, sometimes we have research doctors on board. We have had all of them to give us their thought, and we are constantly trying to evolve to get other insight, because sometimes we are only sitting on one side of the table, don't realize the the thought process from the other side. So point well taken, ma'am, and we will be working on this. If you have any future suggestions, please let us know. We'll work on that as well.
Sure, sure.
Praneeth, your closing comments, and then we'll be done after that.
Yeah, so it was a good session. Again, as antibiotics, as a cardiologist, I'm uncomfortable dealing with antibiotics, and with the stalwarts, Guru and Pavan, sharing their experience, and equally the other side of the picture highlighted by Jansi Madam was amazing. There are many points which I learned. Slightly comfortable, but still I leave the job to the people here, and it's a very good discussion. Thank you everyone for sharing your comments, and I hope to see you in the future sessions as well.
Perfect. Thank you all for attending today's session. Special thanks to my first time attendees here. To all the attendees, particularly those joining for the first time, we would like to get your feedback even offline. So if you have anything, please let me know. If you found the session worthwhile, may we request you to share it to your colleagues, since the general motive is thought sharing. So more the people, more will share it. Just to remind again, the weekly huddle is hosted every Wednesday, 7:30 p.m. The link that you got and the ID password, they are static, which means they work for this session and they work for all future sessions as well. So even if you don't have the invite, you should. That will be my failure. But in case if you don't have, you can use the same link and you can join. All the huddle sessions are recorded, and the recordings are available with me, which can be got by an email, or they are available on podcast and YouTube. You can simply just search for the weekly huddle on podcast or YouTube, and you will get those audios. And if you want the easier way, just email me and I'll share it to you. I thank you again for your time, and good night. I will see you again next week. Thank you all.